Do you see differences in the language samples of Spanish English bilinguals who are in English only instruction versus those who are in dual language instruction?
Yes. So we have evidence now basically giving us some idea of what's happening. Based on some of the work done by me and others, what we know is for both kids who don't have difficulties later on with reading and kids who have difficulties with reading later on. Basically, when we think about kind of the early grades of academic instruction, whether it's kids who are being educated primarily in English from, let's say, kindergarten onward versus kids who are being educated in some type of bilingual education program from kindergarten onward, whether it's like transitional bilingual, dual language maintenance. What we kind of are pretty sure is that, for example, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, right? The kids being educated in these like bilingual education programs. And if we think about Spanish English, which is primarily what we studied, is those kids by and large, and people have conducted like fidelity sort of observations in classrooms with real teachers, blah, blah, blah. What we have seen is that generally speaking, those kids in bilingual education programs, especially in those early grades, I would say kindergarten to third grade is what we have evidence for, is they're being primarily educated in Spanish. They're getting some English, but it's primarily in Spanish, where kids who are not in bilingual education programs are getting instructed all in English. And then kids who are in the English immersion programs are getting educated primarily in English, right? So you basically have kids who are primarily English instructed and kids who are primarily Spanish instructed. That's kind of the major difference you have in terms of early academic instruction for kids who are designated as English learners, right? And what we see is, for example, you basically end up seeing a shift over time in terms of language skills. The English of kids in both types of classrooms basically grows really fast, right? The growth initially is faster for the kids who are English instructed, but the kids who are Spanish instructed, they end up actually catching up to those kids. And then depending on what measure you're measuring, they're sometimes surpassing the kids in English instruction, right?
Because they have that solid base in both languages.
Right. And so that we know that that's happening, and we've seen evidence of that again in multiple studies. Now, and I think that is maybe the somewhat unexpected piece, because I think initially people thought, well, the kids who are English instructed are going to have stronger and faster English language development, and they're always going to have this advantage, right? Turns out the kids who are primarily Spanish instructed end up basically narrowing that gap, and they end up basically catching up.